Islam will continue to be triumphant until there have been 12 Khulafa, all of them from Al-Quraysh.
The God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall the kingdom be left to another people. It shall break in pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever.
This is my brother, my executor, and my successor among you, so listen to him and obey.
My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting.
Whoso obeys me obeys God. Whoever disobeys me disobeys God. Whoever disobeys my commander disobeys me.
The Lord said to me, You are my son. Today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will make the nations your heritage, and the ends of the earth your possession.
Two systems of government, two visions for life on earth. Whichever is true changes everything. This is Christ and Khulafa.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Christ and Caliphate. So today we were originally just going to make an episode about the Houthis and the US, but as we did more reading, we realized that
everything is on fire right now.
Everything's on fire, yeah, in the Middle East. There's a lot of things going on. So we're going to talk about a little bit of everything. We're going to talk about the Houthis. We're going to talk about Israel. We're going to talk about Iran and others. So, welcome.
So what's going on, guys? What are the conflicts at play here?
I mean, the main one is Israel and Gaza. Not the main one, but the one that's been dominating the press, particularly over here in the States, for quite some time. It's the conflict in Israel and Gaza. You know, this isn't a new conflict. This has been going on for a long time. It's essentially Palestinian, Palestinian state, whatever faction it is, but this time it's Gaza. It's not coming from the West Bank, and Israel, and different ideologies at play there. And the other one now, new, is Israel and Hezbollah, which is, Israel, Hezbollah, and the PLO and Hamas have had, a very combative relationship since the founding of the Jewish state. And they have legitimate beef in some ways, right? Like, if I was a Palestinian, I would be very upset with settlers trying to take chunks of land that's been given to us by the Israeli government. And if I'm a person from Lebanon, I would rightly feel like Israel's just too big and has too much influence over the area because of its relationship with the United States and Europe. So
and Israel's had wars with Lebanon before, right? Like
yes,
2006 was the last one.
Yes.
So there's some historic beef there too,
right?
And some old wounds,
right? And
some not so old wounds,
right. So the idea is that this conflict's been going on for a very long time. It predates the founding of the modern state of Israel, or even the modern state of Lebanon, right? These are old wounds, and they go back a very long time. So, yeah, there you have it.
So then, entering into the war from another corner of the Middle East, the Houthis first started launching some drones on Israeli positions.
Right.
And then they started attacking international shipping going through the Red Sea.
Right.
Some of them, and they're all claiming that they're Israeli ships, but they're just not all Israeli ships. Right? So this is basically Houthis against global shipping, and now America and England have started bombing positions in Yemen.
Yes.
Meanwhile, ISIS decided to launch a bombing attack in Iran, which killed 100 people. And the Iranian government then attacked some Sunni factions in Pakistan. And now Pakistan is launching missiles into positions in Iran, and everything seems to be blowing up all at the same time everywhere.
I mean, if you're a student of history, you'll understand that, conflicts in multiple places like this usually lead to prolonged wars that sometimes other factions get drawn into. I mean, I'm not trying to be an alarmist, but it sounds a lot like prior to World War II, and maybe it's not Germany, but it's an idea.
Speaking of the world wars, as of now, can we kind of pair the teams, or not teams because it's not official, nothing's like that except for Israel and like the United States.
Team Rocket.
But like, what are the kind of, not alliances, what's a good word for this?
Factions?
What are the factions that we can so we've got Israel, US, and England, like Britain, and then Iran and what? The Houthis?
The Houthis, sure. Yep.
Let's go. Let's list those.
Yeah. Let's break down. Let's break it down. So
teams.
Let's say Israel, England, and the U.S. basically represent sort of team Western secularism.
Right.
Sure.
Right. Let's say that.
Yeah.
Iran represents House Shia.
Right.
And so Hezbollah in Lebanon are also 12 Shias with Iran, but then the Houthis in Yemen are 5 Shias, which is a different faction of Shia Muslims.
Okay.
So they're kind of like natural allies, but also because Iran does not like Israel, it also pours money into some Sunni factions like Hamas. So Hamas is sort of a Sunni rebel faction, and it's interesting because there aren't really any major sort of Sunni jihadist states anymore, except for like Afghanistan. So the sort of worldview of the Taliban and the worldview of Hamas are very much in sync with each other.
Yeah.
That's not to say the worldview of the Taliban and the worldview of like the average Palestinian are necessarily in sync.
No.
Right.
But Hamas and the Taliban essentially have the same basic worldview in this.
Yeah, it kind of sets up a line between this kind of pragmatic secularism, right? Like in Israel's case, it's a pragmatic Judeo-secularist mindset, right? Like it's centric to Jews, and the mindset of a jihadi, right? And how jihadis operate and what their motivations are. I mean, I think it's important when you talk about factions, you talk about what their motives are and why they're doing what they're doing. And we were talking about this earlier.
Yeah,
in show prep, like jihadis are would look at like the modern state of Israel or America or some of the nations in the West and see some of their like social positions, for instance, and use it as it's not just that we have legitimate beef with them on geopolitical issues or something like that. They're immoral, they're doing immoral things or they're using their influence corruptly or something like that. So,
and where does that put ISIS in Pakistan? Because those are the other people we're going to talk about.
So ISIS is you take the worldview of Hamas, you take the worldview of the Taliban, and then you just dial that up to 11, and then you have ISIS. So mix the sort of traditional Salafi worldview, add the traditional jihadist worldview, and then add the urgency to try and usher in the apocalypse and the return of Jesus and the Mahdi as soon as possible by basically stoking the fires of conflict and instability. Because they have basically apocalyptic goals.
That's ISIS.
Yeah. So like Hamas and Taliban basically have the goals to build a righteous Islamic society, and eventually they believe that the end of time will come. ISIS believes that they're right on the precipice of the end of time right now. They're certain of that, and they're trying to stir stuff up.
I didn't know that.
So it's much more apocalyptic.
What about Pakistan?
Pakistan is a heavily Muslim country, but would essentially be called an Islamic republic. So
Right.
Pakistan, the current Pakistan government is very Western aligned in general, but it has very much its own agenda for its own sake. They're in this sort of big sort of social unrest right now with the government removing Imran Khan and the people still wanting Imran Khan, and Pakistan is mostly concerned about its relationship with India and its influence in Afghanistan and Iran and its kind of immediate neighbors and its own stability and integrity.
Okay.
It doesn't have any grand territorial ambitions. It wants to kind of grow its own sphere of influence.
But it's not with ISIS.
No, it's absolutely not with ISIS, although ISI, their intelligence agency, will kind of work with anybody as long as it achieves their goals.
Okay.
Not to say that our intelligence agencies won't do that on occasion too.
Yeah.
But it's not.
Oh, yeah.
But it's not like Pakistan and ISIS have this relationship of, yes, we like you and we're glad you're here.
Okay. Cool. Those are our players. Those are our proxy teams.
Oh, but also
proxy allegiances.
But also,
Oh, okay.
ISIS, or ISIS-K as it's called, or ISIS Khorasan, which is talking about this sort of historic Islamic province which covers parts of Iran, parts of Afghanistan, parts of Pakistan and Turkmenistan and Tajikistan, right?
Oh, yeah.
ISIS Khorasan also hates the Taliban, and the Taliban hate them.
Oh, okay.
And so they've been doing terrorist attacks against the Taliban stuff in Afghanistan. The Taliban have been hunting down ISIS-K leaders. So
What a mess.
the
Yeah,
Taliban
it's a mess.
and Iran don't like each other, and ISIS-K hates them both. So this is a very complicated web of stuff going on.
And we forgot to mention Saudi, but okay. We can head into like the forces and ideas underpinning these conflicts.
So, well, let's round out on Saudi, because Saudi
Okay.
is not actually involved in any of the conflicts directly right now. Saudi was in a war with the Houthis in Yemen because the Houthis in Yemen were rebelling against the Sunni Saudi-aligned government, and Saudi does not want a force like the Houthis controlling their southern border, basically. But they did not go very well for them. They were not very equipped to sort of fight this sort of counterinsurgency, so they've kind of made an uneasy peace alliance with the Houthis. And basically, what Saudi Arabia wants is for things not to escalate any more than they already are, and to de-escalate. Saudi essentially wants peace, and they want their own financial dominance in the region.
Right.
Along with, so they're kind of with the U.S. on
Yeah,
that?
they are.
Yeah.
They are. Saudi, despite what people may think, is actually a U.S. Western ally in the region
Right.
that essentially has foreign policy, financial interests which
Right.
are aligned with America and the UK.
And military cooperation.
The military cooperation.
Right. It's important to.
And to an extent, Saudi wants to make peace with Israel.
Right.
It cannot make peace with Israel right now. It'd be way too controversial. But they want to have a peaceful, open relationship with Israel at some point in the future.
Yeah. And before the war in Gaza, it was certainly on the table. Discussions were happening.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
And so that's, a lot of people think that's exactly why this attack happened when it did, because if you have general peace between Israel and the Middle Eastern countries,
Right.
these sort of jihadi movements have less and less places to go and less and less things to appeal to.
I think it was like a week and a half or 2 weeks before what happened on October 7th. There was like a joint press conference between People in Jordan and Netanyahu talking about this idea of a prosperity zone being set up, over a big chunk of the Middle East that had regional cooperation and economic cooperation and security cooperation between Israel and Jordan and Saudi Arabia, and what I mean, it wasn't
And Israel?
and Israel.
Yeah. Oof. Okay. So can we now talk about the ideologies behind, maybe not, we don't have enough time for like all the history, unfortunately, in this show, but or this episode, but yeah, let's talk about the ideologies. We can start with like Israel and the United States and those guys.
So, as I was kind of alluding to before, Israel is not actually a hyper-religious Jewish state, right? I think a lot of people think of the average Israeli as somebody who devoutly believes and practices in Orthodox Judaism, and that's just simply not true. There is certainly a sort of secular Western framework.
Definitely.
There.
Yeah. I mean, the modern state of Israel is founded on socialism. It's not founded on religious values at all. The way that Herzl and others looked at, the idea of building a Jewish state was, it was Jewish by ethnicity and socialist in practice. I mean, I have friends who grew up on kibbutzes there, and they were literally like, okay, the children are born, after they're weaned, they go live in the children's house. They don't live, that's a very communist, like kind of socialist thing to do, and it's not like that anymore, or it might be like that in some, random kibbutzes or something like that. But I have friends who grew up that way. So, it's a secular state. I mean, it's a secular state, and they have like secular voting rights. They have a judicial system that is not based on religion per se. I'm sure it influences it, but it's not based on like the Torah, right? You're not pulling the Torah out and saying, well, the Torah says you have to be stoned here. It's secularist, right? It's socialist secularist.
Well, what's fascinating in some ways is that we always think of the Israel-Palestinian conflict as like a religiously motivated war, and while there's certainly plenty of that in there today, really, if you look at the sort of beginnings of it, it's almost like a leftist civil war between like two factions of people who believe in the similar sort of left-wing ideologies.
This current government is more in Israel is more influenced by the religious right, you would call them, right? The Orthodox in Israel, because that's how, they're a parliamentary system, and the prime minister gets support from different parties, and that's how he becomes prime minister.
So one thing we can kind of break down from this, like one thing, Israel has become more and more aligned with the U.S. since its inception.
Yeah.
And less associated with, say, the Soviet Union. That's an option right now. But one thing that is certainly present in Israel, England, and America is a belief that the world should be operated as nation states.
Right.
Basically.
Right.
It's the post-World War II Atlantic Charter, Peace of Westphalia, back after the Reformation in Europe, which essentially takes the Bible's idea of nation, which is a territory defined by its people, its borders, and its law,
right,
and has globalized that idea, right? Right. So not that England and America and Israel are Christian or Jewish countries in a sort of explicit sense of how it's making everybody think now, but as far as how we see the world, the Bible has influenced that.
And also, that idea predates World War I. I mean, we need to be clear about that. Like, if you look in Europe, it's a very European idea, right? Like the French, the French definitely thought in terms of that when they wrote the Magna Carta.
English wrote the American.
English wrote them.
It's like
Right. I was thinking, in my brain I was going French Revolution, and then I didn't want to go to the Revolution.
That's like me saying when the Greeks brought
Yeah.
when the Greeks brought secularism to
Wow.
Turkey.
When the Greeks built the pyramids, they were definitely thinking about.
when the Greek hero Ataturk.
Wow. No.
Okay, so let's talk about so the Israel is more it's aligned with the US. The Bible influenced that a long time ago, but now nobody claims any sort of God, any sort of religion in any of this. It's just about nation states, it's just about democracy. And then what about the Sunni jihadist side of things?
Okay, so the Sunni jihadist side of things does not believe in nation states.
Right.
So what the Sunni jihadist wants is one territory where all Muslims are protected, where they're living under a just government, where the religion and the government are represented by one entity, which is like a caliph.
And this is Hamas.
This would be Hamas. This would be the Taliban. This would also be ISIS to some extent, but not in the way that they want to do it.
Yeah.
Right. And that's not to say that having a caliph is like an immediate goal of Hamas or the Taliban.
Right.
But that's kind of like if they were to imagine what does a just, good world look like, that's what it would look like in their conception.
And so in Gaza right now, I mean, it's hard to say what the people believe, but at least Palestinian supporters everywhere else tend to,
No, because okay. So here's the thing. Most Palestinian support around the world isn't really bought into that specific worldview.
No.
But
that's interesting.
But here's the complicated thing: the sort of like left-wing worldview also doesn't believe in nation states either. It believes in a sort of global union of the working class, which transcends nation states and borders, and has a global system of revolution and justice throughout the world.
Right.
So if you look at sort of like hardcore left-wing secularism, and you look at hardcore like Sunni jihadism, they actually share a lot in common.
There's actually a lot of room for a marriage.
Even though like by definition they don't share. They're opposite. By practice they share.
Yeah, and they both believe in a revolution, right? Burning down the existing order and replacing it with something else.
Right.
So they can both agree that they want to burn the world down, but they 100% could not agree even for a second on what they actually want to build in its place.
Yes. Yeah, that's true. And I mean, were those two factions to prevail in world conflict, they would then wind up fighting each other.
Yeah.
And that's true of a lot of these factions as well.
Right.
So right now Iran is fighting, is funding Hamas, but let's say you have
Hamas, Hezbollah.
And we know that for sure, that they're funding them?
Yes.
Yeah, we know this.
Because of American intelligence? Or
I feel like everybody's intelligence points to this idea that, and Iran is just generally like a carte blanche denier of any involvement. But same thing with the Houthis, right? Like they're there's the Saudis and the Americans say they have proof, and Iran goes, "Nah, you don't have any proof. You're just trying to distract from things that are going on in other places in the world and blame us for your problems."
So right now it's very much an enemy of my enemy is my friend situation.
Right.
So
enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Yeah.
So so they don't like Israel.
Machiavelli for the win, right? No,
Yeah.
is that Machiavelli?
I have no idea.
Or is it Sun Tzu? I think it's Sun Tzu.
Basically, you're not going to be able to. It's kind of a marriage of convenience for now that would not sustain itself.
Yeah.
In the long run, as you can see, because of the tensions between, like, the people that share the worldview of Hamas, who are on the Iranian border, are having problems with Iran, and Iran are having problems with them, right?
Right. The people that actually have to be there next to each other.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So we kind of talked about ideology behind Hamas and Israel and the U.S. And then can we go into Israel and versus the 12 or Shia?
Okay, so let's just quickly kind of get to the 12 Shia. I think in general, the sort of 12 Shia mentality doesn't necessarily have a global ambition, because Shiism has always defined itself against the oppressive Sunni majority.
Yeah.
So it's really, I don't think it's ever really had time to think about global ambitions.
Right.
Right.
It's more about, okay, well, how do we free our own people from oppression?
From the
thing.
Sunni.
Whereas Sunni Islam was always in the majority, so they had space for global ambition. Shia just have we need to cleanse and have proper leadership that comes from the instructions of Muhammad's direct descendants.
Yeah.
Right.
Then the 12 of 5 difference, it's simply a case of basically like the great grandson of Ali, I believe. Two different great grandsons. One faction of Shias believe that one of his other grandsons has the proper line. The Fivers believe a different.
It was his fifth grandson.
Fifth grandson.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they believe he's the final imam.
Right.
So he's kind of like the final person we should kind of like listen to authoritatively. And the Shias believe that there's 12 others, one who has currently disappeared and will come back one day.
And
Right.
do we
and
have...
then on top of that, the ones who are waiting for the 12th imam listen to the clerics in his stead. So that's really,
Okay.
right.
And is there a big difference in like sources and scriptures between those two? 12ers and 5ers? Like,
So the first
were they that different?
So the first sort of 4 is going to be about the same, and then everything that kind of comes after that becomes a divergence point. So you kind of have a different history, and we're going to have to get more into this on another episode.
Yeah.
We'll try and do some deep dives here, but that's
Okay.
basically the...
And where are those guys now? Are they fighting Israel?
Yeah, so the Fivers are in Yemen. They're the Houthis.
Right.
Not all Fivers are Houthis, but the Houthis are generally all Fivers.
Not all 5ers are... Oh, sure. Okay.
And then the 12ers would be Iran and Hezbollah.
Okay.
Right. And most of the Houthis are from one tribe.
And is there any alliance between the both of the 12ers and 5ers, or are they on separate kind of sides at the moment?
Right now, they're on the same side.
Oh, okay.
I'm actually not entirely sure how much conflict there's been, but it's like, I think generally in history it's kind of been like hey, we respect your guy, but you're kind of on the wrong track kind of thing.
Okay.
I don't think they've ever had enough sort of space that they would even have the capacity to fight each other at this point in history. Whether they would or not is like purely hypothetical, I think.
And that's why the Houthis are like kind of with Iran at the moment.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because they both don't like the sort of Sunni power monopoly vested in Saudi Arabia.
Makes sense. And then I guess...
It's actually really interesting.
So where are we? So where are we
might
at?
Set up like Israel is like a proxy war state.
Mm-hmm.
When you really think about it,
Mm-hmm.
it's like how can we attack all of our enemies at one point? Right? How can we destabilize all of our enemies at one point? And not saying that the nation state of Iran is like friendly towards the state of Israel. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying let's just hurt everybody all at once in one location.
So how is that? So since we're on the Houthi Shia thread, what's happening with like Yemen and the Red Sea?
Yes. So right now, America and England are both. So Houthis have been like firing at boats, like firing missiles.
Because this was the original topic that we were gonna hit on, but
yeah. So basically, the Houthis have been firing on Western shipping, basically in their way of saying they're supporting the people of Gaza. They're stopping supplies going to Israel, and Israel, England, and America have been like, no, that's not happening.
I see.
And
I didn't know it was okay.
And so like doing airstrikes on Houthi locations and started kind of like basically putting American fleets in the Red Sea.
Okay, I missed the part that this was all tied back to Gaza.
Yeah. Well, and this is the thing. It's really difficult to figure out how a lot of this stuff fits together sometimes. But, frankly, as the world kind of unwinds and unravels and becomes less stable, a lot of these factions see it as their time to strike when everything else is less stable.
Pretty much. So is there any more that we want to talk about as far as the Houthis, as far as
I mean, they're being
their ideology, as far as like
they're being very aggressive because it's at first like their main intention was to take over Yemen,
right,
like reestablish themselves in Yemen, but now they're asserting themselves in other conflicts, like in Israel. You know, they're being egged on by Iran, you know, to you know help them destabilize what Iran sees as its major enemy. You know, that isn't the West, like Saudi Arabia. So, you know, they're sending Houthis into Gaza.
Okay.
And you know, the United States has been bombing them.
Right.
You know, to keep their positions back. They're saying that the Houthis have said that they're going to send 20,000 reservists into Gaza to continue the fighting and whatever. So they're being very...
Even though the Houthis
let's
would...
just say like aggressive or ambition, however you want to... Whatever word you want to use.
Even though their worldview doesn't even match the sunny worldview
this is the part
of
has
the...
always blown my mind.
Of
right?
the... Hamas, yeah.
The dynamic of the modern Middle East about how all of these people who, like, you know, 50 years ago, despised each other,
yes,
are all coalescing around, you know, common enemies, right? As the world has gotten more globalized, and you know, you have increased communication between states, it's happened to them too.
Okay.
Despite their stark ideological differences.
Right. And so another one, we've got like our words, uber hardcore Sunni / Salafi versus revolutionary 12er.
Yeah, so they disagree on who should be leading the Muslim world. So that's been a conflict since basically the death of Muhammad.
Right.
So that's been that forever.
Right.
Basically.
Right.
It's baked into the cake of Islam at this point.
Right. I mean, the Iran-Iraq war is a modern example of that.
Okay.
Right? Like the Sunnis, Shias fighting each other.
Yeah, even the rise of ISIS is really
Right.
a reaction to the government of Iraq becoming Shia and all the Sunni Iraqis who were connected to Saddam feeling basically neglected by society, and then the jihadis could basically kind of come and say, hey, I'm going to give you your dignity back, come join our movement.
Right.
And then lastly, revolutionary 12ers versus the rebel groups within ISIS.
Yeah. So again, it's still like different facets of the sort of Sunni Shia conflict.
Okay.
There.
Let's see. Anything else we want to say about that?
No,
because we wanted to talk about, we wanted to define the ideologies and kind of how everyone's like being the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Yeah. That's what's going on. But we wanted, I guess, at a point we were talking about like the legitimate grievances of like all these factions, and then maybe we can talk about like a Christian's kind of reaction attitude to those grievances that are legitimately there,
right?
Which comes with understanding what these kind of factions, and we're like super summarizing it, like it's way more in-depth, complicated.
It takes a lot of time.
But this is a short episode.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what is our role of Christians, right? So we have a giant fire in the Middle East right now,
Right.
and giant fires cropping up all over the world. How is a Christian supposed to enter into this? Because what I immediately look at these worldview dynamics. What I don't see on here is like a Christian faction.
Right.
Right. There's not like a evangelical Christian state in the Middle East firing missiles at everybody.
Right.
So on the one hand, it can be like I would sit back and watch the world burn and not worry about anything. How should we think about entering into these things as Christians?
I mean, if I may, I feel like when you talk to Christians, particularly here in America, but also in other places, they don't understand the differences between the parties at play, right? So, for instance, most Christians don't understand what a Houthi is, right? They don't understand who the Houthis are and what they believe. People will look at the kind of Muslim in Iran and or in Afghanistan and assume that that's all the Muslims in the Middle East, right? And they all behave that way. My father is from Afghanistan, so when I would tell people my father's from Afghanistan, the idea in their head is, did he wear a turban? Did he have a long beard? Did he wear all black all the time? Did your mother have to cover herself when she walked out the house? Like, it wasn't like that in Afghanistan. My father grew up in, a state that was modernizing itself. I mean, people were starting to like, the women wore makeup and did their hair and that kind of thing. So it's very different. And then once you start getting into like the differences and the distinctions between what a Sunni believes and what a Shia believe, right? And why they are the way that they are and what fueled their history and what fueled their conflicts. And how remarkable it is, for instance, now that there are alliances popping up between them. It's important for us to be able to differentiate like what's going on. So I think a lot of these negative stereotypes, particularly, or fear among Christians, is perpetuated by ignorance, right? Not really knowing. We're just making assumptions about what's going on over there. And it's really easy to get discouraged, right? Because you're looking at this thing and you're like, there's this people over here and this people over here, and they all just seem to be like, attacking each other and everything else like that. And Lord Jesus, come back, right? Like, okay, we all want Lord Jesus to come back, but in the meantime, we have to understand who's doing what, why they're doing what they're doing.
So do you think people should just kind of take a second to hop online, read up some stuff, watch some videos, reference some sources, some books?
It's crazy because I was watching a
Christians?
a political debate between I can't remember who it was. It was a couple years back, and I think it was Marco Rubio was debating somebody, and he said, and somebody was asking him about the Middle East, and he said, as a rebuttal, can you explain to me the difference between a Shia Muslim and a Sunni Muslim? And the person couldn't. There was a lot of stammering and yapping and everything else like that, and it was just like, well, then you don't fundamentally understand the problem. So what you're trying to do is, I think his point was, you're trying to attack me on political ground, but you don't really get what's going on. And I think it's just really important for us to not be those people, right?
Yeah. So the funny thing is, if there's a Christian reaction of like, all right, everything's on fire, I'm just going to kind of like hunker down and wait for Jesus to come back. That's actually, as far as the factions in the region, that's actually like the closest to the ISIS position in some ways.
Pretty much.
Right. Or the Taliban when they were all hiding in caves, right? Like,
yeah.
Like,
oh my God.
We'll just wait for the Americans to go away, and then
Well, at least they had a plan of what to do after the Americans left.
Right.
To their credit.
Right.
So I think one thing that's important here is, as what Sophia kind of mentioned about these grievances that these groups have. The Bible says the Christians are here to be the salt of the earth, which means we're actually supposed to be invested in the world around us. And the problem with most of these groups is not that they're crazy. It's that they have legitimate grievances. Like a Palestinian living in Gaza has some legitimate grievances against the Israeli government. The average Lebanese citizen living in Lebanon has some grievances by the way Israel conducted itself in previous wars in Lebanon. The average Israeli citizen certainly has some legitimate grievances against the way Arabs have treated Jews in their countries, and the way that they've been treated in the Middle East.
Yeah, even their own country.
Yeah, and have some legitimate grievances about anti-Semitism in the Arab world. And people say, oh, no, we're not anti-Semitic, we're just anti-Zionist. And, that's naivete. There are real anti-Semitism problems.
Right.
Not everybody who's opposed to Israel is inherently anti-Semitic. But
Right. And Zionist is a very nebulous term.
Right.
Yeah.
So either way, there's legitimate grievances all around here. The Houthis in Yemen, who have been suppressed by the Salafi movement coming out of Saudi Arabia, have legitimate grievances. The Iranian revolutionaries complaining about Western interference in Iran have legitimate grievances there. The Taliban would have some legitimate grievances about how Afghanistan was used by the Americans to basically defeat the Soviets, right? Everybody has some sense of legitimate grievance in this setting, right? So we're the good guys, they're the bad guys, what they want is bad, is not
It's not going to cut it.
It's not going to cut it, right? That's not how Christians should be interacting with the world. So being the hands and feet of Jesus means actually being on the ground in relationship with people as individuals, being prepared to see people's pain, see people's problems, and actually point to like biblical solutions,
empathy
to these things,
right?
And to be able to say, hey, yeah, we understand that this issue is here, and picking up an RPG and trying to shoot down a US helicopter is going to lead to your death, not the end of your oppression.
Right.
Or you succeed and you kind of become the new oppressor and kind of keep the cycle going, right?
Right.
We have to get in up close and be salt and light, not hiding in our caves with no plan.
When you say up close, I guess, what are you saying for Christians in the Middle East, and what are you saying for Christians in the rest of the world that don't have to be face to face with these conflicts? So okay. So what I mean by that, and it could be different, right? So often in the Middle East, Christians are scared. Yeah. Because
they're often a persecuted minority, and that's how the church started. And if you want to live in a Middle Eastern region that's better, you're going to need to be brave. There's no shortcut to being courageous in that kind of situation, and to not sit back in fear mixed with superiority over people, but to actually make friends, to sit down with people, to listen to people, get to know people as individuals, and you may face consequences for doing that. If you're in the West, then there's every single one of these groups has people who are connected to them who live in Seattle. There's 12 Shias living in Seattle. There's Salafis living in Seattle. I'm sure there's 5 Shias living in Seattle. There's Iranians, there's Palestinians. Like, people from all of these nations are here. And by showing love and hospitality to your neighbors, you can actually start to enter into these things, right? So you don't need to have all the answers going in, but you do need to have a disposition of I should be involved in some capacity, and keep your eyes open for people from different cultures and different countries living here, and be prepared to invest.
I think particularly here in the States, we have tremendous opportunity because I think that when you look at what's going on back in your home country, for instance, right, let's say you're a Yemeni or Turkish or Iranian or something like that, you're going to feel some anxiety, right, for your relatives. You know, if you're going to feel anxiety for the country that you were born in and the people that you know that still live there.
Yeah, we know people like that.
No, I mean my relatives are in Turkey, and you know they're a couple hours from all of these places, right? You know, one errant missile changes the world in that part of the world, and I think that what we can offer people who are in those situations is an alternative to fear. Right? Like we can offer them an alternative to fear. You know, Jesus said, in this world you'll have trouble, but I give you my peace. And, you know, then he went and died, right? And rose from the dead to show us that he had overcome the world, right? He had overcome all of the oppression of the Romans, and he had overcome oppression from his own people. And on top of that, he overthrew the most important oppressor, death itself, and rose, and to give us hope in the middle of situations like this, hope in darkness. So I think, you know, when we are near people, I'm not saying like from, you know, those cultures, you don't have to come in and hammer them with the gospel, but you can tell them. The Bible talks about like how we should have an explanation for the hope that's inside of us to people who are outside of the faith.
So I think any time, and I want to land with this, but basically any time you have two parties that are in conflict with each other, and when it's deep and when it's personal and when it's very heated, the only person that can come in and have anything helpful to contribute is someone that both parties feel like actually cares about them.
Right.
And is on the side of truth.
Right.
And that's the kind of people we need to be in the world. And so I can't sit down and list you exactly how to solve every conflict right now, but I can tell you, if you are living in a world where you have genuine love for people from different places with different sets of ideas, and you're somebody who's prepared to follow the truth wherever it leads, then the kind of effect you can have on the people around you, and then eventually the kind of effect you might be able to have on the world, is incalculably amazing.
Agreed.
Well, we're at 45 minutes, so thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you next time.